It's the basic things done repeatedly well that really make the difference, not something new and shiny every single day to try. You know, it's consistent basics. That takes patience, that takes grit, it takes determination. And with selection, it was the simple fact of waking up in the morning, knowing what's to come, or worse, knowing you've got to do the shit that made you really painful yesterday. You're going to have to do that again and then some today. And then tomorrow you're going to have to do it again.
And it's stacking day on day on day, isn't it?
Only getting the weight's only getting heavier, the distances are only getting longer, the terrain's potentially getting worse. That takes a lot of start and stop mentality of bookending that day and going, right, that's done, it's in the past, fuck that off, worry about the day that you're on, one day at a time. So,
Lindsay, how are we doing?
Very well, thanks, mate. How are you?
I'm all good. We've just been speaking off camera about a whole load of things that we probably should have saved for this conversation, but I think
every time that happens, mate.
Every time. Just to paint a bit of a picture, you're a hardy Scottish lad. You're a tutor. You're a tutor, aren't you? And you're up from Fort William. And I've always been fascinated as a bloke that grew up in Edinburgh, wondering what it would be like growing up in that part of the world. So why don't you kick things off by telling us?
Well, I actually grew up in various parts of Fort William. There was a period in my life as well, actually, whereby I think my mum and dad were waiting for a council house. We actually lived in a caravan for like 3 years in a place called Bohini, it's kind of like, you got Fort William, which is off the beaten track of any big city. Then you've got Roybridge, which is a small village way off the beaten track of Fort William. Then you've got Bohini, which is right off the beaten track of Roybridge. So it's like way into Sticksville. And it was an old farm complex, and it was like a holiday campsite with some caravans. Beautiful place. And I would say that was my earliest, most clear childhood memories, and actually some of the fondest, because we didn't really have anything apart from, you know, being outdoors and a very modest environment and upbringing at that stage of our lives. Very basic, but it has always stood out as some of the most clear times in my life. And in actual fact, at quite a few occasions in the past, over the years, I like to go up there and just have a little walk around and just reminisce about, you know, when I was a small child, because that was probably my first experience of any sort of hardship as well. You know, when it was fucking soaking wet all the time, it was, you know, the harshest weather imaginable, and we didn't have a car, so it was on the old Shanksy's pony. And I always remember the nearest shop was like 2 miles away. And many times we used to walk from like Spean Bridge, you know where the Commander Memorial is?
Yeah.
So Spean Bridge to Roybridge, it's about 5 miles.
Yep.
And I always remember this, one of the earliest memories actually, my dad used to say to me, and he used to allude to this going backwards when I joined the regiment, because he would say, always remember the first time that you had to walk any considerable distance, which was in a little pair of red welly boots and an old snorkel jacket with a furry piece round the face. And he said it was, you know, snow was like, you know, 6 inches of snow, and he says you just cracked on 5 miles when I think it was about 4 or 5 years old at the time, and without a single complaint. He says I knew then that you were designed for tabbing, so like that was my first sort of mini endurance march as a kid. It's quite funny. But yeah, growing up in Fort William itself, that was from the age of about 6 up until when I joined the army at 17. So I had pretty much my whole childhood, all my school years in Fort William, and an amazing place to grow up. But I'm not sure if you experienced this, you know, living in Edinburgh and having the Pentlands around you and stuff. When I go back now, I am so jealous of anyone that lives in Fort William, because I think I'll just be up the hills all the time.
It's why I'm back in Edinburgh, mate. I moved back up because I missed it.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that actually, and I think that now, because we're not limited down here. We've got the Brecon Beacons, the Black Mountains, and we've got Elan Valley not too far. But the Scottish hills are just, there's something else. You know, you got so many, 250 odd Monroes. I don't know exactly that exact number, but
282 for those listening.
282, yeah, I knew it was 200, 250. So I think you just spot for choice up there. You get that landscape up there. You got obviously, you know, more hills than you can shake a stick at, and that's what I miss about it. And growing up, unfortunately, apart from the odd trek up, you know, Ben Nevis and stuff like that, or up the Glen, didn't really maximise the time there. In fact, it's always the whole Captain Hindsight thing always kicks in. I often find that most things I've done in my life, I always look back when I'm out of that situation and go, I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd gone there. And with Fort William, it was just one of those situations where I spent more time kicking about than I did, utilising the scenery that's around you and the terrain that's obviously some of the best in the world. But then when I went to Germany, same sort of thing. I look back there now and think, why didn't I not travel more in Europe when I was in Germany? So it's always hindsight.
I think
Fort William's a great place to go up. Awesome place. Wasn't much to do there, hence why I left. But beautiful part of the world, as I'm sure you'll agree.
100%. It's one of my favourite parts of Scotland, and we were lucky enough to stay just down the road from Commander Memorial in Spean Bridge when Johnny and I were committing to Project Vertical in November 2020. Yeah. And I just have fond memories. I say fond, I wouldn't have told you that at the time, but getting up at 4 a.m. every day with the wind howling, rain beating down on the windows, and it just felt like the last thing to do would be to get out of the house, let alone go up Ben Nevis. But I think I couldn't help thinking, this forms a different type of person. And I've always been curious what it was like growing up in that setting. So it's great to hear from you that actually that hardiness, that way of life is ultimately, I can imagine, what's made you who you are today. So growing up in Fort William, facing the elements, tabbing from a young age to get your milk, it seems to be pointing us in a clear direction. So teenage years, I know you never got on that well with school. Do you think that was a part of, you knew what direction you were going in, or it just wasn't who you are? How come you ended up in the military at 17? Just talk us through it.
I mean, at school, I would say, I think the school curriculum in that whole environment is either, some kids get on with it, some don't. It can be a timing thing. So I became way more studious the older I got, and I'm still becoming more studious the older I get. And I think that's a bit of an age thing. And I don't like to pigeonhole myself, and I don't like to put anyone on a box as far as, you're either good at that genetically, or you are naturally better at doing something rather than something else. I think people can pigeonhole things too easily a lot, and they can almost shape their belief systems in a way that it just fits the narrative they're pushing in their own minds, whereas it could be wrong, right? Because it was never a case that I couldn't learn, but at the same time, when I look at the environment that I was in, I mean, some of the more productive times I had in school when I was more isolated with a smaller group. That was either in a remedial group in class in primary school, or it was detention in high school. But the common factor between the two of them was that there was more isolation and more focus from someone who was keeping me more accountable, right? And obviously we can relate to this with coaching now. So I think maybe the group environment, the level of distraction, and also the type of person you are. I mean, I was always a very social kid. I was kind of quiet, and in my earlier years I was more quiet, but when I went into school, going through primary school and especially into high school, I became a very social kid. And because of that, all I wanted to do was socialise in class, so I'd be distracted very easily. I would distract others very easily. People would point to the fact that it could be ADHD. I don't know, I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I wouldn't rule that out on some kind of level. But I think it was the environmental factor, plus the quality of teaching, honestly, and I think I'm not being critical of that as far as the individual teachers go. I think that it was more the infrastructure and support that was available for the school. I think they probably felt as frustrated as some of the kids did, because it was very big classes, a huge school with a lot of pupils to look after, and I think it was just a classic case of not enough staff, overstressed, overworked teachers, then having the odd little dickhead to deal with like me. But we didn't make things very easy. And then you had some people who were really digging out blind to make it, a more advantageous environment for kids who maybe had struggles. So I was one of the ones that just couldn't concentrate in class, easily distracted, and as a result of that, I left school early, didn't even sit my exams. So I didn't have any qualifications when I left school. Because all I wanted to do was go out and get a job and earn money, so I was very driven in that sense. I wasn't lazy, I just didn't like school. I just didn't enjoy it, didn't really connect with the learning syllabus, and as a result of that, it was a bad experience in that sense, but at the same time, sociably, it was a good experience.
So you got to exam period and exited, stage left from school, and then what was the process from there to finding the military? Because you say you were driven to get a job and get money. How did you come to the conclusion that it was the Fusiliers, wasn't it, your first regiment?
Yeah, and I think I've said this in other podcasts, which I'll go into in a little minute, which is one of the most embarrassing things, one of the more embarrassing things of my teenage years. But there's a reason for that as well, which is going to reflect what I've just been speaking about. So when I left school, like I say, all I wanted to do was earn money. I was very driven by the thought of having money, probably because we didn't really have any growing up. So there was things that I would always see my mates getting, or it could be holidays, it could be stuff in general, but I'd be like, although I had a great upbringing filled with love from my mum and dad, there was still that need for getting the things and doing the things that I'd missed out on growing up as a kid, that I thought was going to fulfill me in some way. So money was one of those things that I felt driven towards to then go and earn. And I always remember having this conversation with my mum, and she would say, look, you need to stick in more at school, you need to sit your exams, because you could go to college and you can get qualifications that could lead to a better job. And I was just like so impatient, saying, look, I just want to go and work and earn the money now, and if I've still got this burning desire to join the army anyway. So I'd been in the army cadets, I'd had a little bit of a taste of that. I'd obviously grown up in a very military orientated family. My two older brothers were in the military, had been for several years at that point when I was thinking about joining. They had been doing really well. My dad had been in, his two brothers had been in, so there's a very strong military theme throughout my family for years and years anyway. And when it came to me, there was mixed feelings. There was like, I want to do well, I want to go and be a success. It's likely going to be out of Fort William. But do I want to just follow in the footsteps and kind of, follow the leader, or do I want to do something a bit different? So I contemplated this for a little while. So when I was 15, I knew that you could join the boy soldiers at the time. So initially I thought, okay, I'm going to join the parachute regiment, or it might be the infantry. Just I don't know if it's going to be the same as my brothers and my dad. But I just wanted to leave Fort William at that point. I wanted to go and get a career. So when I was 15 and a half, I called up the army careers and I said I'd like to join the army. How old are you? I said, well, I'm 15 and a half. I think it was 15 years and 8 months you could join the junior leaders, it was termed as at the time. And I always remember the lady was like, you can't join the junior leaders now, they've stopped it. And it had been like the previous year that they had completely cancelled the junior leaders. So the earliest age that you could join the army was 17. So I'm now thinking I've got 18 months before I can join the army. And I was like, what do I do now? Then I heard that you could join the Marines at 15. And I have 15 and 8 months. They still had the capacity to join the Marines. So I thought, okay, I'll go and find out a little bit about the Royal Marines, and I'm going to pursue that one. So I got all the information packs and stuff sent through. I read it several times over. I thought, yeah, this is for me. And I liked the idea of it because there'd been a guy from Fort William actually who had won the Ben race. I think he had. His second name was Rogers. I forget his name now. I can picture the guy. But he was quite a bit older than me. He was probably ages with one of my older brothers, I would say, around about that age. So several years older than me, but he was a bit of a living legend in Fort William because he had won the Ben Nevis race, which is obviously a hideously fast time. I don't know if you've done that yourself.
I've not, but I've done the route and I know the times that win it, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, 1:25.
It's I think there's a local doctor now, a local GP, who is just the most unassuming bloke, but is borderline world class trail runner with the times that he can set around there. I think he's done.
Is he the guy that's won it?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's done the Ring of Stahl in a ridiculous time as well. Yeah. It's Finlay something. Finlay McAndrew, maybe. I can't remember. It's Finlay someone.
We're on the same page.
Yeah.
I read about that when I did Ben Nevis the other week.
Yeah.
And I just was like, how is this possible? Like, can someone get up and down, more importantly, that mountain?
Mate, the most beautiful thing about it for me is he just loves it. He's just a local lad who just absolutely loves it, and he's not chasing down Red Bull being look at me go. He's just he's just doing it because it's fun, and he's like, oh, this is
won like the last 10 times. I think it was cancelled because of COVID once. But this guy, I forget his name. His surname is Rogers. It might be Billy Rogers. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that. But he had won the Ben race, and I was kind of inspired by this local inspiration. It was like this hill runner guy. And a couple of others who'd gone away and joined the Marines. I just thought that sounds pretty cool. And there was quite a strong connection with Fort William, and a lot of the mountain rescue guys up there were ex-Royal Marines and stuff. So I thought, this is for me. So I applied to join the Marines. Got to the day of the interview, and I sat the entrance test, and it was a lot harder than the one for the army. You had to have a little bit a little bit of schoolwork behind you. So obviously,
I bet your mum was sitting on your shoulder there in your head, thinking, "Oh no."
yeah, exactly. Yeah, hear a voice, but so I went and did this entrance test for the Marines. On the whole, I actually did okay. When it got to the maths, there's a whole section of maths in this test. I did not have a clue. I was like, I just have to wing this. Unfortunately, winging it wasn't enough, and I failed the maths. I failed the whole maths exam. Because there was nothing you had to just go, 10 plus 10 equals 20 sort of thing. It was more like there's a few formulas you had to learn that were basic things at school, but I just didn't do the work.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know the formula. So anyway, I failed this maths test, and I remember the devastation that I felt. And I thought, holy, what do I do now?
Was there any sort of sentimental attachment to the Marines, and given that you grew up around Spean Bridge and the Commander Memorial,
I would say that was probably, I was familiar with it because there'd been quite a lot of people from Fort William who joined the Royal Marines. So yeah, I just thought it was a suitable thing for me, which it likely would have been. But what's for you won't go by you and all the rest of it. So that was that. You had to wait I think you had to wait 12 months before you could even apply again.
Yep.
So anyway, during that time, a year later, this is going to come around again. I was going to apply 12 months down the line. My brothers got wind of this, and they were like, "You're not joining the Marines. You'll join the army, you'll join the RHF. Come where we are," sort of thing. So the both of them come up to Inverness. It was a little bit later in the year actually. I think I was nearly 17 at the time. Straight up to the Army Careers office. Took me into the office in Inverness, and the local regiment there was Queen's Own Highlanders, that subsequently became Highlanders when they amalgamated with the Gordon Highlanders. So they said, what do you want to join? Here are the choices, sort of thing. They were trying to get me towards the Highlanders. And my brother was like, no, he's joined the RHF. We're in the RHF, he'll join the RHF. And I was like, okay. So that was it. And long story short, I applied to join the army. And I think within about 4 weeks, I was in. I was actually. It was
a fast process back then, wasn't it? There
really fast.
weren't as many procurement contracts to be sold.
Trying to get into bloody NASA, but it's a lot harder. There's a lot more hoops you need to jump through. There's a lot more rigidity with things like medicals and all that sort of stuff. It's just not easy to get in these days. Full stop. But back then it was, and then in my dad's day it was like you go in the Friday and you're in the Monday kind of thing,
Yeah.
It was super quick. But so that was it. That was my army career off to a start.
So
when I was 17.
In at 17, and then was it 5 years in the Fusiliers before you took the decision to become part of a selection course?
Yeah. So you had to do. I think it was like a 3-year minimum period you had to serve before you could apply, but that was very unlikely anyone would do that.
When was the seed planted? When was the seed planted in your head that this isn't enough? I want to be part of the best of the best, and the SAS is what I want to achieve as a soldier. Two different
kind of perspectives on that. The first time was when I was a kid. When I was a kid and I watched SAS, not SAS Who Dares Wins. Jesus Christ, that's the programme on TV now. Who Dares Wins, the movie.
Yep.
The Lewis Collins one. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah. It's either that or Andy McNabb. Most people answer this question with from a childhood point of view. Yeah.
His name's kind of a swear word from where I come from. Now.
Yeah. No, I can imagine.
But anyway, there was Who Dares Wins, the Lewis Collins movie, which was, looking back, it was like really cheesy, but at the time it was legendary. It still is, but I love it. You can't not like it. And I remember watching that as a kid, thinking, "Oh my God, that is, if Carlsberg did jobs kind of thing." I didn't think that at the time, but I mean,
growing up in Scotland at 12 years old, you might have been, to be fair.
Yeah, it was more Tennant's Lager.
Yeah. If Tennants at 12 years old did jobs.
But that was it, and then I had the Action Man, and I went through this obsession with the military at a really young age. But that was more influence from my oldest brother, I would say, because he was Army Barmy. So there was that side of things, and then that was more like the want to be a superhero when I'm older type 5-year-old mindset. Whereas when you get older and you become more realistic in thinking, should we say, it was when I first joined the army. But again, the inspiration came from my older brother. He'd gone on SAS selection a couple of times. Unfortunately, got injured quite badly, especially the second time, and couldn't continue. So didn't fail, just got medically withdrawn on selection twice. But he was really eager to do that. He just chose to go on a different path after that and never looked back. But when I joined the army, obviously he was my inspiration back then. I used to emulate him and want to be like him when I grew up, kind of thing. Because he was like 9 years older than me, so he was like the ultimate big brother type thing. So anyway, when I first joined the army, I think it was the first week we were in the army in basic training, and we got asked the question about who would ever visualise themselves joining the SAS, because we were having a lesson on all the different cap badges within the military, and identifying and differentiating between them. And the last one that came up was the SAS cap badge, who dares wins, the wing dagger. And it was only me that put my hand up.
Oh, bold statement in a room full of young lads, isn't it? Yeah.
I was like, "What the fuck's wrong with you guys? Like, this is like the ultimate." And it was like half of them didn't. Well, most of them didn't even know about it. So I was like, "Yeah, me. I definitely." I always remember being the only one that put their hand up, and subsequently I was the only one who ever joined. Anyway, it was then. It was always in my mind. I mean, that was one of those things that in the infantry people talk about. It's one of those subjects that people tend to talk about, or they know someone from a different regiment, or they've been in a course where there was a couple of SAS guys on it. So there was always this kind of far out ambition within the regiment I was in. So the Fusiliers. It wasn't the common thing to do it. There had been a handful of people tried and failed in the past over decades. And it wasn't because there wasn't anyone good enough within our battalion to go and do it. It was a numbers thing, to a point. Parachute regiment, albeit a great regiment, they send a lot of people on selection. So it stands to reason that out of that overall number of people who apply and go on the course, there's a lot of them fail. There's actually more fail from there because there's more go on the course than there is from my old lot. But obviously there's more pass. And
that'll multiply the confidence within those regiments, won't it?
Yeah. So that shapes the general belief systems of that unit as a unit. Wasn't it? I knew many guys that I worked with in my battalion that I would think would be like ideal candidates. All they'd have to do is go forward and try. And if that happened more, then we would have more people in that regiment now. I wouldn't be so unique in that sense as far as the amount of people that have joined, and me being the first of a very few, I would say. But it was like the old Roger Bannister.
Yeah. I was about to ask. You were the first Fusilier. Do you know how many there've been now, or did it start that effect?
I don't think there's been many since. So I joined the squadron in 2000. So that was 22. Holy fuck! That was 22 years ago. I don't really think about it like that usually, but that's a long time ago. That was 2000 that I joined the squadron. And the following year, so I was the only one to go on the course. It was only me that applied and attended the course. Every other time before that, there'd been one person going the course. And then the following year from when I passed, there was four, maybe five people. 5 people that went on the course. 2 passed. It's like, what, 40%?
Yeah.
Not bad. Yeah, and obviously 3 failed, but the bottom line is that you send 5, 1 or 2 might get in.
Yeah.
Send 10, that number is only going to increase. It becomes more of a norm. If people are going, if we sent 10 people every selection course, 20 people a year, more people would try because they go, it's not so bad to go and fail, but at the same time, he got in, and I think actually he's not all that, or he's not super soldier material. He's just like kind of like me.
But there'll be a familiarity element to it, won't it? In that you sticking your neck out will have made a few of the lads think, well, if he's done it and actually got through, I'm harder than him. Because there's a lot of egos in the army. There's big personalities. Peacocking's one of the things that you're told is going to be snuffed at you in the selection process. But with it, as you say, if you see somebody that you can find some familiarity with, stick their hand up to go and do it, that might give you that little sort of inkling of confidence. And then if they actually go and do it, then you think, well, maybe I'm going to sign up to the next course. But if that hadn't happened prior to you, then you didn't have anyone to find that familiarity with.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, I even had the chance to go back to my old unit and do a whole presentation on the selection course and convince people, that one of my biggest gripes in the past used to be this. You would get like the typical. I remember on the Human 24 podcast, I was talking about the SAS-SID guy, right? And if you've listened to that, I'm not sure if you have, but if you had, then you get the theory. There's like a SAS-SID, we used to call them, and a SAS-SID in the regiment is like the guy. He's more keen and green than the next guy. He does well in courses. He's probably goes through the ranks pretty quickly. He's really fit. He's switched on, and he's the guy who is like one of the best perceived soldiers within that unit. And then if he goes and fails, SAS-SID failed. Like, how am I going to do it? He's way better than me.
Yep.
But then what would happen then is that SAS-SID would come back and go, yeah, it's fucking really hard, and he don't, because in his mind he probably doesn't want anyone to go and do something that he didn't do, because it'll dent his ego so much. So what I decided to do was, when I passed, I'm not getting away from the fact that it was really hard. Like the course was tough. That's just the bottom line, right? But it's totally possible, right? Otherwise people wouldn't do it, right? It's normal humans like you and I who do it. I would look at you and go, holy shit, how does he do that distance in that time with that weight, or do these events in such a timely fashion? But you've trained. You didn't get up yesterday and go, I'm going to become a hybrid athlete tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think the key thing for you as well is you didn't show up to selection as the finished article. You were moulded to become this finished article throughout the selection process, and that's how it's designed. So why don't we rewind a little bit? Why don't you, first of all, for those that might not be aware, lay out the separate stages to the selection process, and then if you just run us through your experience of each of those stages and the sort of key lessons that you learned along the way.
Sure. Yeah, because there's a lot of misconceptions, especially you've got TV things now.
Yeah, we're gonna get onto that as well. Don't you worry.
I'm not going to go into that. I'm not here to slag it off or anything, but there's just confusion there, because people see a title saying SASWDW wins, and they go, candidates, selection process, the wording's kind of similar, VW, all this type of shit, right? So there's a lot of similarities within the terminology, because obviously you've got ex-Special Forces guys running it for a TV company. But one of the questions I get asked, or did used to get asked quite a lot, was, is that actually like selection? And the answer has always been, it's nothing like it. Is it? And
for clarity as well, you were asked to be one of the directing staff, weren't you? And this is the very reason that you chose not to do so.
That was more personal reasons within that, which anyone who is watching this who's from the same background will completely understand. But for those who don't, it's more of a kind of, it's almost like you don't want to be the person who sold the soul to the devil.
Okay.
And unfortunately, and I'm not degrading anyone by doing it. People have got their reasons. People have got different, those people have different beliefs than I have on it, and that's up to them. Nothing against them for wanting to do that. Everyone's got to earn money. Everyone has different ambitions, and that can lead to other things. At the end of the day, you've got to put food on the table. You've got to look after yourself and do what you want to do. And it's not all a bad thing. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's helped a lot of people, whether it be in the professional world and in the personal space. It's not a bad thing.
Do you think it's been an effective recruitment drive for the military in general?
Nah, I don't. Nah.
No.
And I did. And actually, that thought has changed. At one point, this is before a couple of conversations I had with guys who are still in, recently in fact, and my stand on it was that, I mean, it's kind of like a free marketing campaign. This is huge. This program is huge, and it's hugely popular, and it's actually, for the viewer, for their viewing audience, it's a good program. If it wasn't, they wouldn't have the numbers or the popularity. That's just common sense. So it's like, it's a good program. It's actually, I've watched it a few times, and it's like, I can relate to it in ways, but I'm thinking kind of, some of it's kind of cringe, but at the same time I'm like, it's not easy. I mean, it's only a short process, but you get people who are like from normal everyday life giving it a go and realising, holy shit, this isn't actually that easy. And it's a very, very short period of time that they get beasted for, but that's all it is a complete beasting. It's testing their physical and mental resilience over a very condensed period of time, and then emphasised for the camera, right? So people will say to me, like, is it like selection? And I'll be like, nah, because selection is like 6 months long. and there's various phases in that which are each one is 4 times as long as that whole thing. So you can't compare. But at the same time, when it comes to the recruitment side of things, I first thought that this was going to be like a free ad campaign for them, and it kind of was in effect. The problem with that is it's a bit like you and I doing running some ads that are completely incongruent with our businesses, and then getting a wave of people who just are bad fits for our program.
Yeah, I know what you mean. They're not going to stay, are they? It's false advertising. If you're sold on the premise and then you sign up to the premise and it's not the same thing, then you're not going to stick it out. And let's be honest, selection isn't something you can just show up and and walk through with. Oh, I'm surprised at the end. This isn't what I expected.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's even more rigid now as to how that actually gets thrashed out and filtered down and funneled into the process. And
even getting into the army in the first place is even more difficult than it was when the show began, from a general recruitment point of view, because it paints that picture. Yeah, but
you got an idea, and pre-selection courses and the rest of it. Now you're very aware of what's to come when you go on that course. That was one of the bigger problems. But anyway, in actual fact, what I think has happened is that you've had a lot of bad fits go, oh, SASWDW wins. That's me. Right, I'm going to go and do that. And then they turn up and go, holy shit, this is completely different to what I expected. So you're getting people joining the army through watching SASWDW wins, and then going, I want to be in the SAS or the SBS, whatever they decide to join in, from whatever faction, and then they get there and the reality is completely different. So so it's a yes and no answer. I think it's one of those. It's a bit of a two-sided coin as far as, yes, in some ways it's got the name out. More people are aware of what the SAS is, but they just don't know what it's about in detail.
Yeah,
the real SAS, if you like.
Yeah, I think it's probably important for me to acknowledge that I'm only talking about these things conceptually and from the conversation I've had with those that have walked the walk and sort of filled me in on the details. So from a personal fascination point of view, it's interesting to compare the psychology of what the public are presented with and your perception now of how it actually could be a positive. But it seems like the overwhelming consideration is it is just entertainment for you at this point.
Absolutely,
yeah.
But the course, you asked them about the course, right?
Yeah. So just if you want to run us through that 6-month phase in the pre-selection courses that you mentioned just then.
So now what they've got is, which even back when I'm not fully aware of what the process is now, to be honest with you. But back when I did it, over 20 years ago, it was you had to attend a pre-selection course, and I think in actual fact back then, like the parachute regiment guys didn't have to do this. If I remember right, there was like everyone except paras that were on the course, because I think there was such a high influx of parachute regiment guys. There was so much familiarity and history there that I think it was more evident that it was guys who were from other regiments who maybe weren't so aware or what was to be expected, and to just basically separate the wheat from the chaff. It was a fucking weeding exercise to get rid of the tire kickers that would ultimately turn up just to go do day one and go, I tried selection once. But that's all admin, right? So again, it's time, it's money, it's admin. I think what they tried to do is, as a military whole, was to condense that and basically, filter out people who weren't good fits right from the beginning. So there was a pre-selection course that you'd have to apply for. Then you get accepted on that. Then that was like a 3-day. I think now it's 5 days, but I think back then it was like 3 days of solid beastings and tests. That was actually a cheeky little 3 days in itself. And it was pass-fail. It wasn't necessarily pass-fail, it was just recommended or not recommended. So if you did shit, they'd be like, nah, you're nowhere near, and might never be. Or, you're close, but no cigar, it's go away for a year, come back. Or it was, you're ready to go now, get on the next course.
Yep.
Which is what happened to me. I actually went on there very fit, very up-to-date with my military knowledge and all that. I was really prepared for the pre-selection course because I was hyped up for it. So I was like, holy shit, every single part of this is really... going to make a difference. So I prepped myself well for the pre-selection. When I went on the pre-selection, I didn't piss it, but I did very well on it. So I had planned to go 6 months later, and they says, look, we'll see you January. This is November. We'll see you January. And I was like, holy shit, I've got like 7 weeks to prepare for this thing. And I was like, will I be ready? I was like, yeah, you'll be fine. Don't worry. It's a course. You get fitted on the course. Don't worry. Just don't overtrain. That was the biggest thing, actually. Don't overtrain was what the main instruction was.
Which is actually massively ahead of what you'd expect these days, because there's still a pretty negative culture in the army of I need to be doing more than the next guy, otherwise I'm going to fail. And that we've got a lot of clients with Omnia, Johnny and I, that we're there to help calibrate those army lads with bigger ambitions to help keep them robust but adapting in the right direction rather than just beasting themselves into oblivion. And then when you're on week 2, week 3 of the hills, you fall apart because you've gone into it too fatigued.
I mean, I was completely uneducated in this. I mean, if I'd have known then what you know now, even what I know now, but let's say I knew then what you know now, that could have been a good thing, could have been a bad thing, because it could be too. You could become too consumed by the detail, and then
it might give you false confidence as well.
Get in your own head, or it could be the best thing ever if you utilize it properly. But all skills and knowledge are only useful if you utilize them in the right way. So back then it was very, very basic, and I think this is something I always go back to, is like keeping the main thing. But back then it was very basic advice I got, really basic, to the point where it was almost like they were saying don't do much, because I was young and I was fit. The thing is, I had time on my side, and they know for a fact that the course itself, you don't have to be at peak. In fact, you're best not being at peak when you're on day 1, week 1. Let the course get you fit. Just don't turn up completely unprepared, because you're not going to make it past day 1 probably. But if you can pass an army combat fitness test, which is an 8 miler with 44 pound in your back, you can do the rest of the course. If you can pass that and not half die, then you'll be all right for the rest of the course. So the hills phase was like 4 weeks, and you start off as a big group. You do like we used to call it, I think they called it walkabout, where you go out in large groups where you do some navigation techniques. You each get to do a little bit. It's very kind of methodical and monkey see, monkey do type fashion. And then you go into groups of 4 after like the first few days, and then groups of 4 the second week, first half of the second week. Then it's pairs, and then from day 1, week 3, you're on your own. So you kind of do half the hills with someone or more people. Then you do the last 2 weeks by yourself as an individual test. But there's loads of people in the hills. You're individually tested, so you are essentially on your own.
And you're in and out of base, aren't you? But it's you're in and out of base, and the real challenge from it psychologically, and where you sort of separate, for want of a better phrase, the men from the boys, is waking up each morning thinking, I've got to do this again. I've got to do this again. Oh, do I want to do this again? My hips are hurting. What was your experience like with that?
It's like in business, if you have a good week making money, how many weeks can you do that for in a row and keep doing this, having the same performance? Because you'll know, like in business, so people that are watching this that are in the business world, they'll be tuned into the fact that it's the basic things done repeatedly well that really make the difference, not something new and shiny every single day to try. It's consistent basics. That takes patience, that takes grit, it takes determination. And with selection, it was the simple fact of waking up in the morning, knowing what's to come, or worse, knowing you've got to do the shit that made you really painful yesterday. You're going to have to do that again, and then some today, and then tomorrow you're going to have to do it again.
And it's stacking day on day, isn't it?
Only getting the weight's only getting heavier, the distances are only getting longer, the terrain's potentially getting worse, and that takes a lot of start and stop mentality of bookending that day and going, right, that's done, it's in the past, fuck that off, and then worry about the day that you're on, one day at a time. So one of the things is to not overwhelm yourself and think about 2 weeks down the line. Be on week 1 and think of an endurance march, which is 65 k's, and going, oh my god, we only did like 14 k's today as a group, and I'm kind of I'm tired. So 65 k's in 3 weeks from now, or 4 weeks from now, how am I going to do? I'm going to be by myself. It's a long distance. It's heavier weight. The fact of the matter is, all you need to do is chunk everything down, a bit like goal setting. So don't think about the big picture all the time and then overwhelm yourself. Just go, today I've got to get up and I've got to make sure I'm prepped to do this. And at the end of that day, I'm going to be done. I'm going to be sleeping. I'm going to be eating. I'm going to be bookending that day. And the next day, just think about that day. And then when you're out in the hills, it's one step at a time. It's a bit like, you've probably heard people saying, I think David Goggins has even said this type of thing where they go, I only have to get from this point to that point, then I'll think about the next point when I get there. Yeah. And it's true. It's a bit like being on a treadmill. You just go, right, however you can psychologically deal with it the best, whatever fits your personality the most, You've probably done a million versions of this almost, right? So
yeah. I'm from an ultra training point of view.
A minute at a time, or every 2 minutes. You break it down however you want, and that's what I would say is the difference is that just keep getting up, keep showing up every single day when it's dark, when it's cold, when you're tired, when your feet have got blisters, and going again.
So lads dropping around you like flies, directing staff giving you more and more to take on, fatigue's increasing, pain's increasing, questions about yourself are increasing. How did you deal with those lads dropping around you? What did that do for you psychologically? Did it put a fire up your arse, or did it weigh you down?
Yeah, it's the best thing ever, I don't really understand, and this isn't wanting people to fail, but at the end of the day, you know it's a competitive. They have to lose numbers. They can't just take on every single person that attends SAS selection. They can't take on 50% of that. There is essentially a capacity of badged troops at the end. So if they have 250 people going the hills, and miraculously all those people are just getting through it, they don't have the capacity to take 250 people to the jungle, logistically or otherwise. So they have to lose people, right? And as history would prove, that it's always happened. That's just been the pattern. But when people start to drop around you, it's when you're part of a large group of 250 people day one, going, oh my god, am I out of my depth, psyching yourself out and getting in your own head, and then all of a sudden you're still there when there's 100 people there. That tells yourself that, well, if I'm in the 100 that's still here and there's 150 people not here, something I've been doing is more than what they did. So the narrower that channel is in, and the less the numbers become, you gain energy from that, because you're still in the mix, you're still in the fight, and that can only ever be a good thing. So psychologically, it's actually a really good thing for the mind, and I alluded to that on the Human 24 podcast as well when I was on it, about the one day that I really remember when I was having the shittest day ever, and someone who I perceivably thought was way more advanced and more experienced and bigger and stronger than I was,
the SAS said,
just basically wrapped his tits in front of me, right in front of me, and I was like, and suddenly I was just like, it was like a rocket up your ass, because that wasn't in my mind. I wasn't contemplating that. So I'm going, well, I must be mentally stronger than he is, because he's just done something that I've not even contemplated.
For clarity,
So
wrapping his tits meaning pulling out voluntary withdrawal. Yeah.
Actually, and voluntary withdrawal is like something that is completely an individual thing. People have got the reasons, and I think when people do that, again, it's not, you put a bigger consequence in the fact that would he have done it if someone held a gun to his kid's head? Then likely not. But you either want it or you don't want it.
Yeah.
And the more it means to you, then the more reason you have to keep going.
So it's almost the flip side of what you were saying before, whereby once you're in that environment, once you're in that group, and you've got over the lack of familiarity that you had in the Fusiliers that other troops had, it then flipped. So rather than being a deterrent for getting involved, it became further faith in yourself rather than a lack of faith in yourself. So I think if we're to take that and apply it from a non-selection point of view for those listening, because I'm a huge fan of, obviously, I mean, it's conventional these days. People like taking lessons from adversity of others, and I think that the main thing is that you carve your own path and play your own game, and the longer you do that and the more you feed off those around you, take the lessons from those around you, don't let other people's failures, successes guide you too differently from the path you're already on, you will come out on top, as long as you abandon the ego, acknowledge where you're weak, where you need to work, and take the necessary actions to move forwards. That's where we can all pass through our own selection, to use a pretty wanky metaphor. But
no, absolutely, mate.
Yeah, if there's adversity that we need to fight through, then we can take a lot of lessons from what you've just said there. So, Hills phase, you passed out. How many lads didn't pass? So how many of you were left throughout your Hills phase?
I mean, I don't know the exact numbers. Between 250 and 280 day one, and I'm sure we went to the jungle with like 58. I don't know how I remember these numbers, but they just stick in my mind. I think we went to the jungle with 58 students. So that was obviously a couple of hundred-ish.
Was it in Borneo then for you as well?
It was at Brunei.
Brunei, sorry, Brunei, yeah.
Brunei. So you're talking that, percentage-wise, I'm not sure, but a couple of hundred and maybe a few more didn't pass the hills phase, and that's a mixture of PW injury, that obviously results in medical withdrawal or voluntary withdrawal, or not making the times, simply failing the marches and not making the times. So it's a combination of all three, really.
And the premise of the jungle is basically to take those remaining 58 in your case, or the remaining quota of any case, of any course, and put them through humidity, discomfort, out your comfort zone. You don't have a base, you're out in the wilderness, and you've got to deal with the challenges that presents. Dehydration is a huge one. We've had a few guys come on to us that have had to VW or been taken off because of hydration issues. So it's then managing that, but it's basically 6 weeks of completely non-trainable in the UK discomfort to see who's got what's left. So
it's one of those,
talk us through it.
It's one of those. It's an environment that is very It's a very testing environment in many ways, and it definitely separates the boys from the men. There are people who pass the hills, and they jack on day one in the jungle because they throw you into it, and it's. Like I was saying before, when that group becomes a more focused group and there's less people, then becomes more detail, right? So you've got the same amount of staff looking after a lot less people, so there's more eyes on you and they get to know you at that point. So now they're looking for not just if you can get from A to B with a burger on your back in a certain time, however you get there. You're not judging how you get there, you can go any way you want. If you turn up at the checkpoint, you've passed. However, when you go to the jungle, they're starting to look at your soldiering ability. Because at the end of the day, you need to be a soldier. That's at the top of the priorities for them, is that can you operate in the way that they need you to operate on operations. That's the long and the short of it. And there are just some people who aren't cut out for it, or just don't like it. And that's just the bottom line. And some people that are great at it and love it. So when you've got a lot less people, and then you've got 4 or 5 man patrols with a DS, and then you're starting to have to develop or demonstrate new skill, and it's not just demonstrating it like you would in the infantry. You're talking like granular level details that you just cannot get away with, the simplest of things. And it is essentially applying some really basic soldiering skills very, very well, and that's really what they're looking for at that point, because they're still not looking for the finished article. They're looking at someone who's got the aptitude, mentally and physically, to learn and develop those skills further on. Because obviously, life in that regiment, you have to be developing new skills all the time because technology is changing, tactics are changing. There's a lot of things that are always evolving, so you have to adapt to that. And I think the adaptation of what you have to do is one of the most important things. So there are some people who I saw who were very set in their ways, good at what they did, but they just couldn't assimilate new skills as well as someone else. They were just it was too ingrained within them to operate a certain way, and sometimes that came from the more experienced guys, actually.
That's a really applicable lesson to each and every one of us, isn't it? I mean, good funny example. When I used to work in the pub trade for Heineken in London, and this was sort of 2017, 2018, when there was all the stuff around duty going up, and good pubs are being shafted by the government, etc., etc. But whenever I had that conversation with publicans or landlords, whatever you want to call them. The ones that were saying, I've been doing it for this way for years, I know what I'm doing, you shouldn't tell me what I should be doing to my bar in terms of upgrading products, etc., for higher priced, better beers, they were the ones that went out of business the following year. But they were blaming others because they'd been doing it their way for so long. So there's a real world example, an interesting one. I didn't expect to be talking about that at any point soon, but that's exactly the same thing, isn't it? It's you separated those that were adaptable and those that weren't, and the whole reason I suffered from depression in the first place was because I was so stuck in my ways that when I was forced to adapt or staying the same was the wrong decision. Yeah. So now I'm highly adaptable in every sort of facet of my life, and I'm much happier, much more successful, and much more malleable to the situation that I'm in than I was before. So it's fascinating to hear that was something that you dealt with in the jungle under those conditions. So you passed out. You were one of, you might remember the number, you might not, but it seems there's a number stuck in your head. How many of you passed out at the end?
So from the end of the jungle, you get very few will fail.
Yeah.
It's almost like, always remember like the day that because you get told when you come back to Hereford if you've passed or not.
That must be a long flight.
You've got yeah. You just take the words out of my mouth there. It was one of those real nerve-wracking experiences because, especially because because what happens, the DS all get around the table and they go through every single person, because all the DS get to know every single individual, and maybe one DS that thinks you're a good guy and one guy who thinks you're not such a good guy. So it's a bit of a Chinese parliament as far as how they, deliberate on who's going to pass, who's going to fail. So I think and there's a lot of people VW in the jungle, by the way. There's a lot of VWs because of the fact that it's just such a humid, testing, very claustrophobic environment, because you're under the canopy of the trees. You're not like out in the sun. You really don't really see a lot of sky the whole time you're in there. It's just under this thick canopy of trees the whole time, and it's like 4 weeks. So you got like the live firing phase, which is really testing as well. There's actually quite a nerve-wracking experience because of the fact that it's live firing, it's very close proximity, and you're just scrutinised for every single detail of every single skill that you're applying. So there's a lot of anxiety with that phase, I would say. I always remember that, just like get real fucking jitters before going on a range. You're scared. You're just like, it's not so scared of being shot. You're just because you're so close to everyone, but you're just scared of getting something wrong. So that's a really testing part. And then in the actual jungle itself, because you've got build-up training as well. So you get 2 weeks build-up training. You got range package, then you get 4 weeks in the jungle. So I think the whole jungle phase is like 8 weeks, and within that 4 week test phase of the when you're in the jungle, that's the real tough part. And people either adapt to it or they don't. I'd never been in the jungle before, so it was a new thing for me. But I think that was good because I actually enjoyed it. It was frustrating and it was hard, but I always knew that no matter what I do with this course, all I need to do is get to the end and try my best, I will have learnt a hell of a lot that's going to benefit me anyway, right? Although I was trying to pass. So at the end of that phase, you then don't get told until you're back in Hereford whether you've passed or not. And I always remember like being back in the cinema room at the training squadron block in the camp, and then it's a bit like when they do it in X Factor when they've got like the 2 rooms of people. It was like that. So we're all sat in the one room. So alphabetically, the nominal roles called out, and being Bruce, mine was always towards the beginning. And I don't need to lie about these people because I'm probably never going to see them again. But the people who failed, you kind of had a rough idea because they'd probably been pulled aside at some point in the jungle to say, look, this final exercise, this is like your moment. This is going to make or break you. You need to either step it up or you're going to be failing, right? So I hadn't had that chat. I hadn't had a conversation like that, so I hadn't ever been pulled aside. So I was fairly confident, but you just don't know. And I genuinely didn't have a clue. I thought maybe they're going to say I'm too young or whatever. So I got to the end and we're sat there, and the training officer comes in. He says, right, the following names. It was the chief instructor comes in and he says the following names go and see the training officer. So the training officer's in charge of the course. The chief instructor is like the head DS. He says go and see the training officer. Following names. So I'm thinking alphabetically, is it going to be read out that way so I can kind of be sure? And then all I need to do is think about the names that have been called out, because everyone in the course. You're thinking, right, yeah, good guy, one of those ones. So they started calling the names out, and it got past B, and then the next name that got called out was like wanker. So then, and the remaining, the whole list basically, it was all the dodgy, like, maybe nots, and some definitely nots. There was some guys that were like, it got to the end and just weren't ever going to get in. So I heard this list being called out. I thought, my name's not on it alphabetically, so I'm pretty safe. But then they got sent out and had to go and see the train officer, and it was about half. It was like 50% of that. So I think, and then obviously people had jacked in the jungle. So I think there was something like 18, but 18 at the end. SAS and SBS combined.
And those left in the room got the thumbs up.
I think 12 guys that went to the regiment that year, yeah, and then like 6 or something went to the SBS. So so a small number. But as soon as those guys left, and I'm looking around me, seeing all the top blokes in the course around me, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm pretty confident. And then he says, right, so the training officer, you still don't get told. No one says anything. And all of a sudden the training officer comes in at the end after telling them obviously they're off the course, and then going, right, you guys are what we term as the hardcore element of this course. So from that, I think we lost about maybe 3 more before the end of selection. It was, and bear in mind that was like half the course at that point. You've still got 3 months. But when you think about how that's chopped up, you go 4 weeks hills, 8 weeks jungle. That's 3 months of 2 very important parts, and then you've got the remaining part, which is only one essential part after that. Really, they're all essential, but there's only one real testing part, which is combat and survival, and escape and evasion. Which is, if you're going to lose anyone, it's probably going to be there. And we lost one guy on that, I think, and then lost a couple more. I can't remember how, but in the last 4 weeks is the parachute course. So like, there's like 2 week phases. From that point on, you're doing something different every 2 weeks. So like hills, jungle, you do like observation posts, you do communications, signals, you do the parachute course, and yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, and then that's you done.
Happy days. Happy days.
So when you get towards the end, you know you're passed. It's a formality in some ways.
Yeah.
As long as you don't refuse to jump out of a plane or do something grotesquely wrong, then you're passed.
Yeah, and there you were. That was it. So what happened next? What was your military career from that point onwards with the SAS?
So I mean, I joined at the perfect time because there had been guys that had joined 10, 15 years before who hadn't really deployed anywhere significantly other than maybe Gulf War One, and then Northern Ireland. But apart from that, and then Bosnia. Apart from that, it wasn't anything really, really big that had happened that was on a global scale. So when I joined, like shortly after that, or about a year after that, I think it was, or a bit more maybe, that obviously the World Trade Center was attacked. There was the whole Afghan thing, and the Iraq War. So it was a very operational period of my life in the regiment. So I'd spent like 6 years in the regiment, and that whole time was pretty full on because Iraq, Afghan, multiple times.
Do you remember the first time you were in a real firefight that made you think, "Oh shit"?
Yeah, I do. And I think this is something I spoke about before, which is about how do you respond to that, and it's something you can't. You
can't predict the adrenaline. You can't. There's nothing that simulates that, is there?
It's like if you've ever done a boxing match and anything. Anyone's ever had a fight will say that no matter how much you train, nothing really prepares you for the actual fight, and how you're going to respond to that. You don't know until you've done it, and I think that was the case. For me, really, the first time I was ever in a firefight was, when you're actually being shot at. It's a weird experience because the old fight or flight mechanism kicks in, and you subconsciously let adrenaline take over, and you don't know how you're going to respond until you respond, and then you can only look back and see how you responded. And in that case, I always thought it was kind of weird how, at the time when it happened, the first ever time I was like being shot at, was that I had to find the humour in the situation. So it was almost like it was funny. I know that sounds really weird, and I've spoken about this multiple times, but it's almost like you're, stealing apples from a garden and getting chased by the owner of the house. Kind of, the adrenaline's still there, but you've got to run away because you could be caught. But it's the same mechanism. It's just in a very adult form, in a really serious sense that you have to find something to cope. And I always think it's a coping mechanism that it makes you function. If you freeze, or you're not going to necessarily get the best response, are you? Whereas if you do something, however you can manage to do that mentally and physically at the time, it's almost an automatic thing. But what training does is that it develops a set of drills that then allow you to optimize that situation by how you respond physically. The other part was just mentally how you respond, how you feel at that time. What's going through your head. And then, like I say, you can only look back and go, "Holy shit, that was close." But then you reflect properly and go, "Well, that was close." And I think that's the awakening you have afterwards. But it's like a post-event feeling more than anything.
And you refine that over time, so the adrenaline becomes less overwhelming and more, okay, we're in the fight, what do we do next? And that's something that improves.
It's always there, but I think you learn to control how you respond to situations. If you took a bunch of civilians and put them in a range, they're going to act very different than a bunch of professional soldiers. So I think with anything, experience is your best friend, and it gives you those lessons that will then develop future action when it is needed. But the best lessons are learned through
doing,
making mistakes.
Yeah, that's something Gaz Banford said. Exactly, you can't cheat experience. Being experienced is experiences times thousands, was the way he phrased it. And he says something very similar, that no matter how well refined a soldier you are, no matter how much mental preparation you've done, nothing's going to prepare you for when that actually happens. But then the more often it happens, the more experienced you become in those situations, and the more you can act when they come. So,
and that's like anything.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's just exposure. Yeah. Exposure is the key for whether it's endurance training, whether it's, as you said, knowing that when you have a really good day of trading business-wise, having the foresight that it's not going to be like that forever. But sometimes you can get lost in your own ego, you can get lost in your own confidence, and exposure to hard things or difficult things, again, is something that from what is an elite soldier at world level, from your perspective, there is a lesson there that we can all take away and apply to our own day-to-day lives. So I think, without wanting to gloss over the decorated experience you've had within the forces and the operational experience you've had, I'm very interested to hear exiting the military. What happened in terms of the psychology behind it for you, the reasons why, and then how did you translate your military career, the personality that you built for yourself, and the ambitions that you built for yourself into a career out of the military?
So I was one of those guys who was always going to stay in the military for the full term, and I hadn't really thought past that. I just thought it was inevitable that I would stay in the military and see my time out and probably do extended service. So that was my whole focus at that point. But when you go into that cycle of doing all the things you'd ever imagined doing, and then looking at those that had gone before you, a bit like before I joined the army, I'd be stood in a pub on a Friday. I did a job as an apprentice welder for about a year and a half before I joined the military. And I got to a point where I was stood in a pub on a Friday looking at the people who had gone before me, thinking that if I keep doing this is my life. This is what I'm going to be like in 10 years' time. I'm going to be that guy in the pub, getting on the piss, Groundhog Day, week on week. And that's one of the reasons why I was so anxious to get out of the one-horse town of Fort William at the time. Fast forward to when I was exiting the military, it wasn't that I was looking at people going, oh, I don't want to be like that, but there was an element of that, because I thought, well, you're looking at people who were victims of failed relationships and marriages, devoid of relationships with their kids, and even the guys who get it right and manage to keep that glued together over a period of time with a very understanding wife and strong family unit, and those who really see that through, you're still in a lifestyle where you're maybe got kids and you're not seeing them that much. So I think my perspective and my ambition changed direction, and there was part of it that was almost like just a knowing that I had. It was just a gut feeling, and you'll have had gut feelings many times in life, and you know what it's like when something's just pulling you away from something and towards something else. It was kind of like that, and although I loved my time in the regiment, and my thing is I was going to go and be a DS on selection, which is something from doing selection I always wanted to do, was be a DS on the real SAS selection. That was the ultimate job. That would be, if tenants did jobs, that would be the one.
That's the one. There we go. Yeah.
So that was the only thing that was really ahead of me, that I thought that's something I really want to do. But other than that, all I saw was people go past a certain point in their careers and then be stuck behind a desk, or stuck in an admin role and get involved with the politics behind what goes on in the background within the head shed, in the senior ranks, and the people that make the decisions. There's a lot of politics, and to be honest with you, I just didn't really envisage myself. I'd always envisaged myself as a soldier on the ground, doing all that cool shit. That's why everyone joins. No one joins the regiment to go, well, I want to be the fucking guy who sits in the office, counting stores lists and being accountable for, equipment. No one does that. But that's something you inevitably have to go to, a place you inevitably have to go to, and a job you have to do if you want to stay in. It's not always about being the front man in the door and clearing rooms and shit and all the cool stuff. So I suppose I just had a bit of foresight on it, thinking, right, okay, I'm now at a point where it won't be long till I'm 30, and this is at the point where I either commit to it and see the whole time out, or if I'm going to cut away, this is the time to cut away. It was a pivotal point in my career, and my reasons for staying were just less than my reasons for going. I just thought there was something else out there that I wanted to pursue, and also that combined with the lifestyle of having a stable family home with being there all the time. And I thought, if I'm going to have kids, I didn't have kids at that point, but I planned to, and I thought, well, if I'm going to have kids, I want to be there for them all the time. So there was a lot of foresight on it. So when I eventually decided to pull the plug and leave, there were quite a lot of shocked people. Actually, it was like, holy crap, what do you mean you're leaving? They just didn't expect it. But at the same time, they supported me all the way. There was no one stood in my way. It was a very mature approach to it, and it was more like, anything you need, let us know, get as much as you can out of the rest of the time you have in the military. So that's what I did. So when I left, obviously the first priority was to earn money, because without money, you're kind of like stuck. So thankfully, had a few connections on the outside. A good friend of mine called me up when he heard I was getting out, and he said, "Look, as soon as you leave," he says, "there's a job waiting for you." So I walked straight into a job when I left the military, doing some teaching stuff. So I was teaching hostile environment courses. So it was like surviving hostile regions, the course was called. This was more for foreign and Commonwealth office people, media groups, and you're just basically telling them how to look after themselves in a particularly hostile environment, either specific or general. So I ran these training courses for several months, and then I started to deploy operationally to Iraq, and then for the next 12 months after that, I worked more operationally out in Iraq for CNN through a security company, like third party, but the client was CNN. So I used to work with the correspondents, going out with them, doing recce's, going on the ground with them, embedding with the military units when they were reporting on certain situations. Some of that was good experience, really good experience. I mean, I had some good times out there, hairy times, but pretty good.
What was the hairiest experience you had?
I just constantly, like, rocket attacks and stuff. You start eating your dinner, then rockets start landing like a street away, and it feels like it's at the table next to you at that range. So like, just the uncertainty, I would say, the uncertainty of moving around, the lack of support that you have when you're in a role like that. So when you're in the military, you've got your band of brothers around you, and you've got a lot of support should you require it. Whereas when you go out there on Civvy Street and you're working for private clientele, depending on the setup, depends on the level of support, and it's never going to be as good as what you'd have in the military. So that was it. You're more isolated and more on a limb as far as what you're doing when you are working as a civilian on the security circuit. So I did that for a short period of time, but that was more of a means to an end. So my plan at that point was I wanted to go into fitness. I was really heavily into fitness anyway at that point, and in more particular, I was really into bodybuilding. So like, my ambition was to open my own gym, and I thought, this is going to be the thing that's going to be the ultimate way of living, is to have my own gym and coach people and all the rest of it, and only to find out actually there was a lot more involved than what people think to just open the gym and then just sat there, living the life of Riley. It's actually probably 15 years of mainly high stress involved, I would say, running the business like that. So that was pretty much how it unfolded. So I left the military, did some private security, got a lump of money together, opened my first gym, and then from there, up until 6 months ago, I still had that gym. Well, there was two gyms in that time span, but the second gym that I had, recently left that industry to just pursue the online coaching thing.
Yeah. So just on that, just to finish, because I know you now specialise in helping people with their own general habitual lifestyle, mindset, fitness, an all-encompassing lifestyle shift for them to live a more robust life. I think it's probably fair to say. I might have completely ruined your elevator pitch there. Apologies. But what are the main lessons that you, as a Special Forces operator, have taken, one, as an individual strolling down Civvy Street, and two, what are the main ones that you apply to the athletes, clients, and people that you work with now?
See, self-awareness is a big one, and I bang on about that a lot to clients actually when I'm talking about, because everyone likes the thought of personal development and self-help and self-improvement, whatever you want to call it. There's a plethora of stuff out there, but like that old saying, I posted about this the other week, there's no self-development without self-awareness. So it's about learn as much as you can about yourself, and anything that you do in life that's going to physically challenge you, and to allude to what you said earlier, Fergus, is the exposure is the key ingredient here. Without exposure to adversity, to hardship, you're never going to know if you're going to be able to handle it if you don't ever do it. So therefore, training and experience and exposure, well, there's no better preparation for something inevitable that may happen at some point. You just don't know when that's going to be. It could be something to do with your family, something to deal with physically. It could be an environmental factor of being stuck somewhere. If you've got experience and you've been exposed to that, you've got confidence, you've got certainty, and with that, you've got light at the end of the tunnel, right? You've got hope. So I would say that the experiences I had within my whole military career really did it gave me that foundation to everything I still do today, and everything I have done post-military experience, because it's some of the most challenging times, or the most challenging times in my life physically anyway, and sometimes mentally, that have really set the standard for everything I do in life. As far as other lessons I've learned, there are many. I'm almost stuck for words to how to go into it, but there are so many lessons I've learned from the military experience that it's just really paved the way for everything else in life, I would say. Yeah.
So you think the big thing that you work closely with your clients on is helping them find exposure to things that they haven't necessarily suffered through before, to better prepare them for when things go south?
Well, yeah, because when anyone comes on board with either yourself, with me, they've got a set of beliefs they currently have. That might not have always been that way, but their recent experiences and past experiences have shaped a belief structure and set of belief systems that has led them to a point in time where they are reaching out for help in some way. Now that help might either be to get out of a trough that they may be in life, to get out of a hole, or it could be that they feel that they're almost at the peak, but they just can't quite get to their optimum performance as an individual. So whatever level they're at, they're at a current level of belief within that period of time, and whatever they think is the case at that moment, you've got to either you got to change that within them. So what I do is I put them through a series of training, obviously like you do yourself with your clients, that gives them that exposure and that experience to give them feedback as to how they can utilize that and improve even further. So it's just about that incremental exposure, increasing beliefs. And I always say it's a bit like, if you've got potential, everyone's got a massive amount of potential they don't even tap into, but if you can release as much of that potential as possible and then take the relevant action, the result will be there. If the result is there, the belief systems will then improve. The belief system improves, you increase certainty and belief, you're more likely to release more of that potential because you get past experience and increased belief systems. So therefore that cycle just keeps on repeating itself, and as long as you stay consistent, that's always just going to get you, it's forever going to get you better.
That's it, isn't it? It's just constant self-improvement is a life better lived.
Yeah.
in my mind. So
yeah, and it shouldn't stop.
No, agreed. Lindsay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and hearing everything that you got to say. Where can people find you on social channels, website, etc., etc.?
Okay, so my new website is currently being developed. It should be ready within a few weeks, and that will be www.themodernwarriorproject.com. My email at the moment is lindsay@themodernwarriorproject.com. Instagram is @the Lindsay Bruce, so just the followed by my name as it's spelt, one whole word. So the Lindsay Bruce is my Instagram. It's the main channel that I connect with people through. I am on Facebook as well, but I don't really use that much. But
no, it's just angry aunties and uncles these days, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. Well, the my Instagram, should I say, is probably like you've got yourself, is just a link tree in the bio with all the relevant stuff on there. So there's a direct link to the Modern Warrior Project application form in the link tree within my Instagram profile.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for your time, and plenty of things we can all take from that. So have a
absolute pleasure, mate.
Yeah, have a good afternoon. Speak soon, mate.
Yeah. Nice.